Rankin Bass. A name that's synonymous with the holiday season. After all, I'm sure plenty of you, given when I'm making this go public, you probably already watched one of their specials this year, and probably will again next year. They made several different classic Christmas-themed specials that have stood the test of time as being holiday favorites, but they aren't really around anymore. And you're probably wondering why. I mean, they made some great specials. Awesome specials. Why? What happened to them? Well, to be honest, it's not very complicated. When it comes to Rankin Bass, their story is relatively simple and straightforward, but since I'm sure some of you don't know why they are gone, I'll happily tell you the whole story, since, well, it's Christmas time, and I already did the Charlie Brown thing, so we gotta nail down Rankin Bass for the new year. Otherwise, I'll have to wait till next year, because it won't make any sense if I do it at any other time. Initially, Rankin Bass was founded not as Rankin Bass, but as Videocraft International Limited, by two men, Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass. These two guys had very similar backgrounds when it came to their skills. Rankin served as director, producer, screenwriter, and Bass was director, producer, lyricist, composer, and would eventually be an author. Videocraft was put together on September 14th, 1960, and originally the pair were going to utilize the company to make television commercials. At first, they didn't really want to do, like, specials or movies or cartoons or anything like that, but very quickly they decided, you know what, actually, no, we're gonna do that exact thing. A significant portion of their productions, in fact most of their more famous ones, would utilize stop-motion animation, which they refer to as Animagic. Ooh, fancy. It was just stop-motion, though it utilized models and puppets, and this created a very unique, distinctive look, as not a whole lot of animators were utilizing stop-motion. Even today when it shows up, people were like, oh, it's really cool! Oh yeah! And back then it was the same way. It was like, it's like three-dimensional. Granted, in the modern day we see it even less, because now we have literal 3D animation, but back then this was the closest thing you could get to that, and it still retains a unique charm. However, what most people don't know is that much of the animation was outsourced over to Japan. Many big names you might know even now, actually had their hands in a lot of Rankin Bass productions. The stop-motion stuff was handled by Tadahito Moshinaga at his own studio, MOM Production, or I guess you could call it Mom Production. He was often credited simply as Tad Moshinaga. Rankin Bass also did more traditional hand-drawn animation, and that was outsourced too. They utilized studios like Toei, who have handled just so many different anime. Like, if you like anime, you know who Toei is. Aiken, Dentsu, Mushi Production, as well as Topcraft. Topcraft in particular is relevant because they were founded by former Toei animator Toru Hara on February 1st, 1972, who was credited as the animation supervisor on many of Rankin Bass's specials. A lot of members of Topcraft's staff, even after the company folded, would go on to become industry legends, particularly Hayao Miyazaki, famous for founding Studio Ghibli. So basically, yes, they outsourced a ton of their stuff to Japan, but given how dominant Japanese animation has become over the last few decades, there was a lot of talent to be found when it came to this modus operandi. While they were still under the Videocraft name, one of their first projects was an independently produced television series in 1960 that was called The New Adventures of Pinocchio. It utilized the stop-motion animation process. They followed up Pinocchio with another independently produced series in 1961 that was called Tales of the Wizard of Oz. And that was their first production to use traditional cell animation, though uniquely, it was not handled in Japan. That one was animated by Crawley Films in Ottawa. However, neither of these outings were massively successful. I mean, they were fine, but they weren't exactly going to make the studio a household name. But at the time, it was the 1960s, one of the big draws in their business of animation was having some kind of holiday-themed animated special for airing on American television. So in 1964, they managed to strike a deal with NBC, as well as a sponsor, General Electric, to produce a Christmas special, Rudolph the Red-nosed Reindeer. It was to be stop-motion animated, and it was to be an adaptation of Robert L. May's 1939 story, Rudolph the Red-nosed Reindeer, as well as the song it inspired in 1949, Rudolph the Red-nosed Reindeer. All of these were called the same name, okay? Rudolph, interestingly, had already had a traditional cel-shaded cartoon made for him in 1948. Likely, this was part of their motivation to make their version stop-motion, to make it a bit more distinctive. And the thing was, it worked in terms of success. When it came to audience appeal, Rudolph absolutely smashed it. It became one of the most popular, longest-running Christmas specials in television history. It aired on NBC annually until 1972, when it moved over to CBS. It's still cherished as one of the greatest Christmas specials ever made. And this success motivated Rankin Bass to start making other holiday-themed specials. This would include Cricket on the Hearth, which isn't nearly as popular as a lot of the others because it wasn't very good. And they also started looking to other holidays. They produced The Mouse and the Mayflower in 1968, for example. But they were really mainly known for their Christmas stuff, like The Little Drummer Boy, Frosty the Snowman, as well as Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Little Drummer Boy was 1968, Frosty was 69, and Santa Claus is Coming to Town was 1970. Though in 1971, they decided to get a little bold again, and create their first Easter television special called Here Comes Peter Cottontail, which did reasonably well, all things considered. Most of these were very well received. The aforementioned Christmas specials are their most well-known works by far, but in between all these holiday specials, they were making more just regular stuff. Though it is worth mentioning that the real problem for Rankin Bass over time was that they really couldn't nail down too much success with things that weren't Christmas or something holiday related. Yeah, people loved their Christmas stuff, but there's only so many stories you could tell about Christmas before you kind of run out of that, or you just get bored of it. They really wanted to do things that weren't Christmas, but not a lot of those did amazingly well. Certainly not as well, as they're not nearly as fondly remembered. They still did holiday specials throughout the 70s. In 1974, they put out The Year Without a Santa Claus, which was also fairly well received. It even got a horrible live-action remake in 2006. Seriously, don't watch that. It is absolute garbage. Just watch the original. And in an effort to continue the Christmas run, they made an interesting decision that is, it had mixed results. Basically, they made a whole bunch of sequels to many of their classic specials, like Rudolph and Frosty. They even had a crossover in 1979, Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July. But these sequels, some of you may not have even been aware of them, because, yeah, they really weren't that good, all things considered. Like, a lot of those stories were meant to be just on their own, and making a follow-up to any of them was remarkably difficult, at least not in a way that was as good as the originals, and basically none of them were, even if you like some of them. And this was a problem because people wanted more new stuff. In 1979, they did issue Jack Frost, which is a little bit more obscure, but is a pretty good original. And in 1975, they also did The First Christmas, the story of the first Christmas snow, which was also relatively well received. Their final stop-motion style Christmas story was known as The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus in 1985. That special, well, okay, historically speaking, it is considered very good. Modern reviewers really like it, but when it first aired, it didn't really do all that well, and likely helped motivate them to, well, not really focus on that anymore. Their non-holiday output was really what they wanted to do, and some things did okay, but other things didn't. In 1977, they produced an animated version of The Hobbit, and in 1980, they also did The Return of the King. Some of this stuff even included theatrical releases. The most famous one of those would probably be The Last Unicorn, which I feel like many of you are quite familiar with, and yes, Rankin Bass did work on that. Though, it's worth mentioning, it was a commercial failure. Critical reviews were very positive, but it did not do well at the box office. and this was always Rankin Bass's problem. If it wasn't Christmas, things just didn't usually go well, with one major exception. They produced multiple regular television shows. Some did well, some didn't, but the one that did really, really well was one that you're probably familiar with, and I guarantee a lot of you didn't even know Rankin Bass was behind this. Thundercats. And suddenly a whole bunch of 80s kids just stood up in unison and shouted, "Thundercats! Ah!" all at once, and it's okay. I get it, I do. Thundercats is heralded as one of the greatest cartoons of the 1980s. It still has a major cult following, and yeah, Rankin Bass was behind it, based on characters that were created by Tobin Wolfe. While it may have been just another one of those shows to help promote a toy line, it was still a really good show. And let's be fair, I feel like every cartoon in the 80s was made to help promote a toy line. I mean, He-Man, Transformers, yeah, that was pretty normal. Gotta push those toys out there. Thundercats did so well that Rankin Bass proceeded to double and then triple down on it, creating Silverhawks in 1986 and then Tiger Sharks in 1987 as part of the series called the comic strip. Interestingly, fun fact, I actually like Silverhawks more than Thundercats. Silverhawks is supremely underrated. It still follows a very similar formula, but I just prefer Silverhawks just in general. I don't know a single person that liked Tiger Sharks. I don't. I just don't. And as I mentioned, they were part of the comic strip, which was an animated series that featured 4 rotating cartoon segments. The mini-monsters, Street Frogs, well, not Street Sharks, Street Frogs, it's way less cool, Karate Cat, and Tiger Sharks. However, it seems like their "let's just keep doing what Thundercats did" idea just didn't really pan out, mostly because it kind of spelled their failure. The comic strip, in particular, did awful. It was a complete flop, and it would force the studio's closure in 1987. But the partnership between Rankin and Bass didn't actually end. They were still good friends, and would work together again in 1999 to help create The King and I, and then in 2001 they made their very last holiday special, which, like many of their specials, was based off of a holiday song or story. This one was Santa Baby. Due to the changing of the times by 2001, the outsourcing of the animation did not go to Japan. This time it went to South Korea, and it was the final Rankin Bass produced special, with the partnership being officially dissolved shortly after that. The remaining assets between the two was mostly acquired by Warner Brothers Entertainment. In terms of the quality of Santa Baby, well, I haven't seen it. I think a lot of you haven't. It didn't really have the same legacy as the older ones. Not just because it was traditional animation, but it just didn't have the same appeal, I guess. It's hard to say. Maybe some of you have seen it, and feel free to share your opinions on it, but I can't really comment because, like I said, I haven't watched it. I watched the other ones, and those were really, really good. They still are really, really good. Rankin Bass Productions, which is the name they had used since 1968, is still cherished for creating some of the best holiday specials around. Many of these are still watched every year by millions of people, and that's an achievement, regardless of whether or not they were able to succeed in other avenues. And, yeah, a lot of that was very mixed. We can see that. The fact is, they handled Christmas really well, and they were able to go down in history in that regard. As for the two men behind it, though, well, Arthur Rankin Jr. settled down in Bermuda after he retired, and for a time was looking to produce stage shows instead of animation. He would die after a brief illness on January 30th, 2014 at the age of 89. Jules Bass would go on to become an author, and he would also become a vegetarian. This is relevant because many of his books were actually vegetarian-themed. He worked on a series of children's books based around the character of Herb, who was a vegetarian dragon. Which... okay, I'm not a vegetarian myself, but that's really cute. That's really cute. I actually really like that. He also wrote fiction for adults, which included Headhunters, later adapted into the 2011 Selena Gomez feature, Monte Carlo. Bass would eventually die of age-related illness on October 25th, 2022, at the age of 87. Rest in peace, legends. And with that, a special thank you goes out to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Jack Carson's River Videos, Lord Off 444, Icer for 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redline, NS Productions 8104, Will Jack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, Josh Johnson, Caleb Rainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Dolinsky, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mark Holding, Mr. Terrevel, Hayden DeGrow, Bad Train Puns Are Best, Kurt Forkum, Harry, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Kevin Wood, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, Duraushi, William Nemo, Dr. Racia 78, Shimasu, Metal for Life Guy, Andrew Bowen, Crimson Rose, Ryan Wehofer, Zintech M, Boss K, Orange Glass, Andy, Ohio Trucker 1, Windy City Rails, John Videola, Extra Special J, Bob Kondirk, Jared Brussel, Daryl Williams, DE Ultra, Connor Hahn, AJNH86, Brian Philly, Nathaniel Brown, Liam Wright, Mr. Sleepy, NJ1969, Rashad Austin, Wes Most, DFL Church, Caleb Crosswhite, Profound Punk, The Baxter, Jonathan Coco, Murder Drone Stall, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, individual of fun. Farewell.